Hi everyone, this is Clint from Persuasive Evangelism. I'm at Lake Sacagawea on this February day. The sun's showing a little. Today we're going to go over this book, Return of the God Hypothesis by Stephen C. Meyer. It says 3 scientific discoveries that reveal the mind behind God. I discovered Stephen Meyer about 3 years ago. He is a scientist, and he talks about discoveries that point to intelligence behind the biology, the universe, and he's very fascinating. You should look him up on YouTube. He has a lot of great interviews, discussions, and he about a little over 2 years ago, before COVID. Oh, those are eagles. A couple eagles are flying by. I can hear them. A couple years before COVID, December 2019, I got to go to an apologetics conference in Seattle, and he was one of the lead speakers. So I got to listen to a couple of his lectures, and after the conference, I got to meet him briefly and talk to him, which was neat. So I totally recommend looking him up on YouTube and so on. So this is his 3rd book. It's the first book I've read of his. His first 2 books are Signature in the Cell and Darwin's Doubt. I have those books. I plan to read them, but I read this one first. So basically this book is about 3, I'll just read what it says. What I call Return of the God Hypothesis. Okay, so there's 3, in science, there's 3 things they've discovered that point towards God, and it makes the all these ducks started flying. But so 3 evidence that point to God, and points holes in like atheists' argument about the universe just created by itself, and just everything became created through scientific materialism. Just matter, energy just created everything by itself. So he says the 3 things are what I call Return of the God Hypothesis. Evidence from cosmology suggesting that material universe had a beginning. Evidence from physics showing that from the beginning the universe has been finely tuned to allow for the possibility of life. And evidence from biology establishing that since the beginning, large amounts of new functional genetic information have arisen in our biosphere to make new forms of life possible, implying, as I argued before, the activity of a designing intelligence. So the first section of the book is kind of the history of science, and it talks about scientists through history, their discoveries, and how scientific thought has changed. It was theistic. Most scientists believed in God. And even, when they discovered how gravity worked, they saw the wonders that God gave us a mind that we could do science and discover how God's laws and, how, the universe was created and how it functions and works. But then in the 19th century with Darwin and evolution, then he quotes, and then Karl Marx, who said we could just have a utopian on earth without God. And then Sigmund Freud, who analyzed the mind, and that our mind just got everything that happens in our mind can be without God, explained without God. So a lot of scientists turned away from God, and then and today although there's a lot of Christians that are scientists, just in the public sphere, a lot of main scientists are saying, there is no God, science can explain everything. But the funny thing is, as he goes through the history of science, the last 100 years, and especially the last 40 years, there's been all these big scientific discoveries that are pointing holes into the atheist argument that, how could just matter or the universe just come by itself, and then all the information and biological beings and so on. So, and then these are the 3 that he goes over into a lot of detail, but he explains it well. So you don't have to be a scientist to understand it. But so the first one, evidence from cosmology suggesting that the material universe had a beginning. So for beginning, like with the Greeks, ancient Greeks, they believed like the universe was eternal, and that thought was a main, most scientists thought that, the universe was eternal. And then they started, which is fine, because then they could say, well, we have eternity to deal with some, life coming to exist and all this. They could, they don't really have to explain it, because they're just, if you wait long enough, something will happen. But then evidence for the Big Bang, and he goes into detail how they discovered the Big Bang, like there was the beginning of the universe. And a lot of scientists fought back on that because they said it's too close to Christianity. They didn't like the idea, but then they discovered more and more evidence that points to the universe starting from the beginning, and then that shortened the time where everything could happen. And then step 2 is evidence from physics showing that from the beginning the universe had been finely tuned to allow for possibility of life. So this universe that was created started, there was nothing, and then it was created. It was created so finely tuned that life could exist. Like it was like specifically created for us to exist. And he goes over a lot of, and then he goes into a lot of detail, like all of this, from the very beginning when the universe was created, all of this, all of these things were set so exact, and if they were just off a little, life couldn't exist. And that's like on the cosmic scale. Hugh Ross, I've read a lot of his books, then talks about like fine tuning, in the galaxy level on the Earth. There's so much fine tuning on the Earth, how it has to be so exact for us to exist. But then if you just step back to the universe scale, the universe is so fine too on the cosmic universal level. So that's very fascinating. And the third one, when Darwin started evolution, he said, well, it just happened from simple cells somehow existed, and they just started multiplying and so on. But then when you look, and he thought like a simple cell was just like a little blob of goo, but now they discovered evidence from biology establishing since the beginning large amounts of new functional genetic information have arisen in our biosphere to make new forms of life. They found like DNA, RNA. It's like this complex computer digital code that runs these cells. And even at the very basic level, one simple cell, it has digital code, it has mini micro machines in it, and so on. So it's like, if you see a computer running, you don't think, oh, it just started by itself and it has this information, or if you see a book, all those words, that comes from a mind. So just like a digital code, advanced program that can run, comes from a mind. Information just doesn't appear. So then he goes into all this detail. So I wanted to read just a few quotes. So first one. All right. So as I mentioned, in the 19th century, with these three great figures, Darwin, Marx, and Freud, science seemed to answer many of the deepest worldview questions. And it says, so basically it says, Darwin told us where we came from, Marx told us where we are going, and Freud told us the human nature and what to do about our guilt. All three claim to be the base their theories on scientific evidence and analysis. And Karl Marx, you can see what's happened, with his utopians of society. It's resulted in millions of people being killed, tortured, dictatorships, freedoms taken away. So let me get to the next quote. All right, the next quote is, oddly, the idea of a steady state model came to Gold while he was watching a horror movie. Oops, I'm reading the wrong one. Okay, it says, Einstein was not the only scientist who reacted reflectively against the idea of a beginning. Eddington himself found metaphysical implications troubling. Philosophically, the notion of a beginning at the present order is repugnant to me. A scientist, when there's all this evidence that the universe wasn't eternal, that there is a beginning, he didn't like that idea. And I said, I should like to find a genuine loophole. I simply do not believe the present order of things started off with a bang. The expanding universe is preposterous. It leaves me cold. And then Robert Dicke, a leading Princeton University physicist during the 1950s and 60s, later explained that why a finite universe elicited such a knee-jerk philosophical opposition among so many scientists. An infinitely old universe would relieve us, he said, of the necessity of understanding the origin of matter at any finite time in the past. A finite universe, by contrast, would force scientists to confront the uncomfortable question about the ultimate beginning of the material universe itself. It also raised the possibility that the universe had begun in something like a creation event produced by a cause that existed independently of matter, space, and science. So let me get to the next quote. All right. So I like this quote. It says, in a memorable conclusion to his book, Robert Jastrow observed that the discovery of a definite cosmic beginning, the Big Bang, he said, is an exceedingly strange development, unexpected by all but the theologians. They have always accepted the word of the Bible. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The development is unexpected because science has had such extraordinary success in tracing the chain of cause and effect backward in time. For the scientists who have lived by his faith in the power of reason, the story ends like a bad dream. He has scaled the mountain of ignorance. He is about to conquer the highest peak. As he pulls himself over the final rock, he is greeted by a band of theologians who have been sitting there for centuries. So, Christians have always said, the universe had a beginning. The Bible begins, in the beginning, God created the heavens and earth. And then science for a long time was trying to get away, from that idea, the universe was eternal and so on. And then all these scientists that aren't Christian see that the universe does have a beginning now. And then let me get to the next one. It's getting a little windy. All right. And it says, and this talks about fine-tuning. Fine-tuning in physics refer to the discovery that many properties of the universe fall within extremely narrow and improbable ranges that turn out to be absolutely necessary for complex forms of life or even complex chemistry, and thus any conceivable form of life to exist. Physicists now refer to this as anthropic coincidences. And all of these fortunate convergences, all these coincidences, is anthropic fine-tuning of the universe. The fine-tuning of these properties has puzzled physicists not only because of their extreme improbability, but also because there doesn't seem to be any necessary physical or logical reason why they have to be as they are. Philosophers of science call such fine-tuning features contingent properties, since they could be conceivably have been different without violating either the fundamental laws of physics or any necessary principles of logic or mathematics. We apparently live in a kind of Goldilocks universe where the fundamental forces of physics have just the right strengths, the contingent properties of the universe have just the right characteristics, and initial distribution of matter energy at the beginning exhibited just the right configuration to make life possible. And they call it the fine-tuning problem. Like, this universe is so fine-tuned for us to exist, like it was done on purpose. And the odds of it, and the odds are so great that, in reality, we shouldn't have a universe like this unless it was done intentionally. All right, I just have three more. 139. I'm trying to do this with one hand. I need a better way on how to go through this book. All right, and it's getting colder out. The sun went down. All right. So Hoyle, there was the scientist Hoyle. He's an atheist, but then he was stunned by how fine-tuned the universe is. He said Hoyle was stunned by these and other cosmic coincidences that physicists began to discover in the 1950s. Whereas before he affirmed atheism and denied any evidence of design, he began to see fine-tuning as obvious evidence of intelligent design. As he put it in 1981, a common-sense interpretation of these facts suggests that a super intellect has monkeyed with physics as well as with chemistry and biology, and that there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. The number one calculates from the fact seems to me so overwhelming as to put the conclusion almost beyond question. And the fine-tuning parameters that Hoyle discovered were by no means the only such parameters necessary to ensure a life-friendly universe. So this atheist just saw so much evidence of fine-tuning that it turned him to a belief in God or a creator. And then let's turn. Okay, and then well, the other thing is DNA. So the DNA is like digital code, like a computer program in each cell. Thus, whereas many physicists have recently considered a design by a super intellect as an explanation for the origin of a finely tuned features that make life possible in the universe, biologists have long resisted the design hypothesis. Ever since Darwin, they have assumed that they could, in other words, of oyle, explain design without a designer. It was, however, due in large measure to Crick and Watson's own discovery of information-bearing properties of DNA that materialist understanding of life has begun to unravel. Scientists have become increasingly and in some quarters uncomfortably aware that there is at least one appearance of design in biology that has not explained by natural selection or any other purely naturalistic mechanism. The information present in every simplest living cell. So science can't explain this digital code information. Information comes from intelligence. All right, and I have one more quote to do, if I can get to it. All right. So the digital code, it says, thus, Richard Dawkins notes that the machine code of the genes is uncannily computer-like. And software developer Bill Gates observes that DNA is like a computer program. Similarly, biotechnology specialist Leroy Hood describes information stored in DNA simply as digital code. And those discoveries were made clear, digital information in DNA and RNA in the 1960s. So we have digital code in each cell that makes us, runs each cell of our body. And it's more complex than anything we've ever created. And, code, book, words come from a mind. So that points to God as well. And they can't explain it to how it could be done naturally. So this is an interesting book. It goes into great detail, but Stephen Meyer explains it well. Also look up some of his YouTube videos online. Just put it in. Great. He has great discussions and a good sense of humor. So thanks everyone. Goodbye. God bless.